The bread hit the dirt first, 2 dozen loaves, crushed under hooves before Clara Whitmore could even scream. Then came the rider, tearing through Redstone Crossing like destruction had a schedule to keep. By the time the dust cleared, a week's work was ruined, her daughter was crying, and the entire town square had gone silent. Clara didn't think. She just moved, grabbing that rider by his collar and unleashing every ounce of rage she'd swallowed for 3 years. She didn't know his name, didn't know his face, didn't know that humiliating him in public would be the most dangerous mistake of her life. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Clara's journey reaches. Now let's dive into part 1. The morning started the way all Clara's mornings started. Before dawn, before hope, before the town remembered she existed. Her hands moved through the dough with mechanical precision, kneading in the dark bakery that still smelled like her husband's tobacco, even though he'd been dead 3 years. Lily slept upstairs, curled around the rag doll Thomas had made her the week before the fever took him. Clara didn't let herself think about that. Thinking led to stopping, and stopping led to the kind of silence where grief could catch up. The counter was covered in loaves, 24 of them, golden and perfect. Her best batch in months. Maybe her best ever. She'd used the last of her good flour, the expensive kind she couldn't afford to replace. But Mrs. Henderson had promised to buy a dozen for her daughter's wedding, and the ranch hands always came through town on Fridays. If she could just make it to Friday. If. That word had become the architecture of her entire life. She wrapped each loaf in cloth, loading them carefully into the wooden crate Thomas had built. Her fingers traced the joints he'd dovetailed with such care, back when they'd believed the bakery would be their future. Back when future meant something other than the next impossible payment. "Mama?" Clara turned. Lily stood in the doorway, 6 years old and already too familiar with worry. Her daughter's hair stuck up in sleep-wild tangles, and she clutched that doll like it was the only solid thing in the world. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart. Sun's not even up yet." "I heard you crying." "I wasn't crying." Clara's voice came out sharper than she meant. She softened it. "Just talking to myself. Old ladies do that." "You're not old." "Tell that to my back." Clara forced a smile. "Come here." Lily patted across the floor in bare feet, and Clara pulled her close, breathing in the little girl's smell of her, sleep and soap and something indefinably sweet. This was why she got up before dawn. Why she kneaded dough until her shoulders screamed. Why she smiled at customers who looked through her like glass. "Today's going to be a good day," Clara whispered into her daughter's hair. "I can feel it." She shouldn't have said that. She knew better than to tempt fate in a town like Redstone Crossing. The sun was just breaking over the eastern ridge when Clara loaded the crate onto her small cart and began the walk to the town square. Lily insisted on coming, dancing ahead with that doll, singing some nonsense song about rabbits. The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of sage and dust. In another life, Clara might have found it beautiful. Redstone Crossing wasn't much. A main street of weathered buildings, a handful of cross streets that petered out into prairie, and enough saloons to service the ranches that sprawled across the territory like empires. The Grayson Bank stood at one end of town, brick and imposing, a monument to the family that owned most of what mattered. At the other end, the land office, the general store, the shuttered church that nobody attended anymore. And tucked between the saddle shop and the boarding house, Clara's bakery, or what used to be her bakery before the bank started calling it theirs. She was halfway across the square when she heard the hoofbeats. Fast, too fast for town. Clara's hand shot out, catching Lily's shoulder and yanking her back just as the rider exploded around the corner. The horse was massive, a bay gelding, wild-eyed and foaming. The man on its back rode like the devil was chasing him, bent low over the animal's neck, hat pulled down against the wind he was creating. "Watch out!" Clara screamed. He didn't hear, or didn't care. The horse hit her cart straight on. Wood splintered, bread flew. Clara watched her entire week, her entire month, her entire fragile plan for survival explode into chaos. Loaves hit the dirt and rolled. The cart tipped, wheels spinning uselessly in the air. One perfect loaf landed directly under the gelding's hoof and was crushed into the earth like it had never been bread at all. The rider hauled back on the reins finally, and the horse reared and screamed. By the time all 4 hooves were on the ground again, Clara was already moving. She didn't think. Thinking was for people who had choices. Her hands found the rider's coat, expensive leather, she registered dimly, and she hauled him sideways out of the saddle with a strength she didn't know she possessed. He hit the ground hard, and she was on him before he could get his bearings, grabbing his collar and yanking him up to face her. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded feral. "Do you have any idea?" The man blinked at her, stunned. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes that were somewhere between brown and green. Handsome, probably, if she'd had the luxury of caring about that. Right now, he just looked like every other entitled bastard who'd ever ridden through town like other people's lives didn't matter. "Ma'am, that was a week's work. A week! Do you know what that means?" She shook him, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a sane voice whispered that this was a terrible idea. She ignored it. "I spent every penny I had on that flower, every penny, and you just... Her voice cracked. Tears were coming, hot and furious, and she hated herself for them. She hated him more. By now, a crowd had gathered. Redstone Crossing didn't get much entertainment, and a widow screaming at a stranger in the middle of the square was better than theater. Clara saw Mrs. Henderson clutching her shawl, saw old Pete from the livery, grinning like this was the best thing he'd seen all month, saw Mr. Dennison from the general store shaking his head with the kind of pity that made her skin crawl. And there, at the edge of the crowd, Victor Grayson, tall and silver-haired, watching with the cold calculation of a man who saw opportunity in everything. His daughter Margaret stood beside him, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Clara," Margaret's voice was honey-sweet poison. "Are you all right?" "Oh, you poor thing." Clara wanted to spit. Instead, she turned back to the rider, who had regained his feet and was brushing dirt off his coat with the careful dignity of someone trying not to make things worse. "I'll pay for the damages," he said quietly, "whatever they cost. I apologize for—" "You'll pay?" Clara laughed, and it came out sharp and broken. "With what? Magic? You think money fixes this? You think—" She gestured at the ruined bread, at her overturned cart, at the wreckage of her morning. "I don't want your money. I want you to look. Look at what you did." He looked. Something shifted in his expression. Shame, maybe, or recognition of the kind of desperation he'd never had to face himself. "I'm truly sorry, ma'am. If you'll just tell me—" "Get out." Clara's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Get on your horse and get out of my town. And next time you feel like riding through Redstone Crossing like you own the place, maybe think about the people who actually live here." The crowd had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The rider held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, mounted his horse with quiet grace, and rode away, slowly this time, carefully, like a man who'd just learned something he hadn't expected to learn. Clara stood in the wreckage, shaking. Lily appeared at her elbow, clutching the doll, her small face white with fear. "Mama, are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." Clara's voice was steady again, but her hands weren't. She knelt and started gathering what could be salvaged. Most of the bread was ruined, ground into dirt, crushed beyond recognition. Maybe 6 loaves were still good, 6 out of 24. That was quite a show. Clara looked up. Victor Grayson stood over her, blocking the sun. He was a handsome man in the way poisonous things are often beautiful. Silver at the temples, expensive suit, smile that never reached his eyes. "I don't need commentary, Mr. Grayson." "Of course not, but you might need this." He held out a folded piece of paper. "Your payment. Due in 3 days." Clara's stomach dropped. "That's not until next week." "Terms changed. New bank policy." He said it the way another man might say, "Pass the salt." Casual, inevitable. "I'm sure you understand. Business is business." He set the paper on top of her broken cart and walked away. Margaret followed, but not before leaning down to whisper, "You really should be more careful, Clara. All that anger isn't good for your health, or Lily's." The threat was unmistakable. By the time the square emptied, Clara was alone with 6 salvageable loaves, a broken cart, and a payment notice that might as well have been a death sentence. She sat in the dirt and let Lily curl into her lap while she did the math she already knew the answer to. She was ruined. 3 years of barely surviving, and one reckless rider had just pushed her over the edge she'd been clinging to with bloody fingernails. "Mama?" Lily's voice was small. Is the mean man going to take our house? Clara's throat closed. She couldn't lie. Lily was too smart for that. But she couldn't tell the truth either. No, baby, I won't let that happen. She had no idea how to make that promise true. The next morning, Clara woke to find an envelope under her door. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up, exhaustion making her movements slow. Inside was money. More money than she'd seen in 3 years. Enough to cover the flour, enough to cover the payment Grayson had demanded, enough to breathe. And a note, written in clean, careful script, for the damages, and the anger you had every right to feel. E.H. Clara's hands shook as she counted the bills. It was exact. Not a penny more than what she'd lost, plus the accelerated payment. Whoever E.H. was, they'd done their research. Who's it from? Lily peered over her shoulder, eyes wide. I don't know. But even as she said it, Clara remembered green-brown eyes and expensive leather. The writer. It had to be. She should feel grateful. Instead, she felt suspicious. In Redstone Crossing, nobody gave you something for nothing. There was always a cost. Still, she took the money to the bank that afternoon. Victor Grayson's smile was thin when she handed over the payment. Prompt as always, Mrs. Whitmore. Though I must say I'm curious where you found such resources on short notice. That's my business, Mr. Grayson. Indeed. He marked the payment in his ledger with slow, deliberate strokes. You have 2 months until the next one. I do hope your resources prove equally reliable then. The dismissal was clear. Clara left before her temper could cost her more than she could afford. She made it 3 steps out of the bank before Margaret Grayson appeared at her elbow. Clara, a word? I'm busy. This won't take long. Margaret's smile was sharp. I wanted to warn you, as a friend. We're not friends. No, but we could be, if you were smarter. Margaret lowered her voice. That man you humiliated yesterday? That was Ethan Hale. Does the name mean anything to you? Clara's blood went cold. Should it? Only if you care about surviving in this territory. He owns more land than my father has loans, runs cattle from here to the Wyoming line, and you just screamed at him in the middle of town like he was some drifter. Margaret's eyes glittered. He could destroy you for that. One word to the right people, and every door in Redstone Crossing closes in your face. Then why did he pay for the damages? I have no idea, but if I were you, I'd start worrying about what he wants in return. Margaret patted Clara's arm with false sympathy. Men like Ethan Hale don't do charity. They make investments, and nobody invests in a losing proposition without expecting profit. She walked away, leaving Clara standing in the street with a sick feeling spreading through her chest. Ethan Hale. She'd humiliated the most powerful rancher in the territory, and now she owed him. 2 days later, a man appeared at the bakery. He was older, 50 maybe, with weathered skin and the kind of calm that came from decades of dealing with difficult situations. He removed his hat when Clara answered the door. Mrs. Whitmore? Name's Bill Carver. I work for Mr. Hale. Clara's grip tightened on the doorframe. I already repaid him. This isn't about repayment, ma'am. Mr. Hale would like to speak with you, if you're willing. And if I'm not? Bill's expression didn't change. Then I'll tip my hat and wish you a good day. Mr. Hale was clear. This is an invitation, not a summons. Clara wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed to slam the door and pretend none of this was happening, but Margaret's words echoed in her head. Men like Ethan Hale don't do charity. When? Today. I can wait while you make arrangements for your daughter. An hour later, Clara sat in a wagon next to Bill Carver, watching Redstone Crossing disappear behind them. Mrs. Henderson had agreed to watch Lily, though her disapproval had been obvious. Nice widows didn't go riding off alone with strange men to visit ranchers they'd publicly humiliated. Clara was well past worrying about nice. The Hale Ranch revealed itself slowly, first just more prairie, then fence lines that went on forever, then grazing cattle scattered across land that seemed to have no end. By the time they reached the main house, Clara's anxiety had crystallized into something harder. The house wasn't what she expected. It was large but not ostentatious, stone and timber, built to last rather than impress. Practical. Lived in. The kind of place a man built when he planned to stay. Ethan Hale met her on the porch. In daylight, without dust and anger clouding her vision, Clara could see him clearly. He was tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from work rather than leisure. His face was weathered but not old, marked with sun lines around eyes that watched her with careful attention. He'd cleaned up since their encounter, no dirt on his coat now, though the coat itself looked just as expensive. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for coming." His voice was quieter than she remembered. Steady. "Mr. Carver said you wanted to speak with me." "I did. I do." Ethan gestured to the porch chairs. "Will you sit?" Clara sat. Her spine stayed rigid. Ethan settled into the chair opposite, leaving careful space between them. For a long moment he just looked at her, not threatening, not assessing, just looking, like he was trying to figure out how to say something difficult. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "A real one, not just money." Clara blinked. "You already paid for the damages." "I paid for the bread. I didn't pay for what I took from you that morning." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You were right to be angry. I ride through that town all the time and never think about who I might be in the way of. Never think about what it costs when I'm careless. You made me think. That's worth more than flour." Clara didn't know what to say. Apologies in her world came with conditions. This one sounded almost genuine. "So you brought me all the way out here to say you're sorry?" "No." Ethan's mouth curved slightly. "I brought you out here to offer you a business proposition." There it was. The cost. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Hale." "Good, because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a contract." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I need bread. My ranch hands go through supplies faster than I can keep up with, and the quality I've been getting from the general store is lacking. You make good bread. I tasted what I ruined. Best I've had in years." Clara stared at him. "You want to buy bread from me?" 2 dozen loaves a week. 3 if you can manage it. I'll pay above market rate, and I'll send a wagon to pick them up so you don't have to haul them yourself." He set the paper on the table between them. "Read it. Take it to a lawyer if you want. There's no trap here." "Why?" "Why what? Why would you do this? You could buy bread from anyone. Why me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Because you're trying to survive something that would have broken most people. Because you've got a daughter depending on you and you're doing it alone. And because when I destroyed your work, you didn't cry or beg. You got angry. You fought back." He met her eyes. "I respect that." Clara looked at the contract. The numbers made her dizzy, more money per week than she'd seen in a month. Enough to pay Grayson, enough to fix the leaking roof, enough to maybe, possibly, breathe. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just bread." Ethan stood. "Think about it. Bill can drive you home whenever you're ready. If you decide yes, bring a signed copy to the ranch next week. If you decide no," he shrugged, "I'll understand." Clara took the contract home and read it 17 times, looking for the trap. There wasn't one. The terms were simple, fair, and clear. A straight business arrangement with no hidden clauses. She signed it. The first delivery was 3 days later. Bill Carver arrived at dawn with an empty wagon and a friendly smile, loaded the bread with careful hands, and left payment in cash. Clara stood in her bakery and counted the money with shaking fingers. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't drowning. Word spread fast in Redstone Crossing. By the end of the week, everyone knew Clara Whitmore had a contract with Ethan Hale. The reactions ranged from surprise to envy to something darker. Margaret Grayson's smile in church that Sunday was sharp enough to cut. "I see you've made quite an impression on Mr. Hale," she said, cornering Clara after the service. "How enterprising of you." The implication was clear. Clara's face burned. "It's a business arrangement, nothing more." "Of course it is." Margaret's tone said she didn't believe that for a second. "Though I'd be careful if I were you. People talk. And a widow spending time with an unmarried rancher, well, you know how tongues wag." Clara wanted to scream that she'd been to the ranch exactly once, that Bill Carver picked up the deliveries, that she hadn't even seen Ethan Hale since signing the contract. But explaining would only make it worse. She walked away instead, Lily's small hand in hers. That night, lying in bed listening to the usual sounds of the town settling, Clara thought about Margaret's warning, about the way people looked at her now, some with envy, some with judgment, all with speculation. She should care. In a town like this, reputation was currency. But when she closed her eyes, she saw her paid rent receipt, saw Lily's new shoes, saw the flour sacks stacked in the bakery, bought with money she'd earned, not begged for. Let them talk. For the first time since Thomas died, Clara Whitmore wasn't just surviving. She was winning. The prosperity lasted exactly 3 weeks before Victor Grayson made his move. Clara was in the bakery before dawn as usual, hands deep in dough, when she heard the knock. Not the friendly tap of a customer, something harder, more deliberate, the kind of knock that came with bad news. She wiped flour on her apron and opened the door to find a man she'd never seen before, thin, with a clerk's pallor and eyes that wouldn't meet hers. "Mrs. Whitmore? I have a notice from the Redstone Crossing Town Council." He thrust a paper at her and left before she could ask questions. Clara read it twice, certain she'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. The bakery was being cited for health code violations, outdated equipment, improper storage, structural concerns that posed public safety risks. She had 30 days to make corrections or face closure. The list of required repairs covered the entire second page. New ovens, updated ventilation, reinforced flooring. Estimated cost at the bottom made her stomach lurch, more than she'd make in 6 months, even with Ethan's contract. Clara's hand shook as she set the notice on the counter. This wasn't random. Health inspectors didn't just appear after 3 years of ignoring her existence. Someone had sent them. She knew exactly who. By mid-morning, half the town had heard. Mrs. Henderson stopped by with tight-lipped sympathy. "Such a shame, dear, though I suppose they do have to maintain standards." The subtext was clear. Clara had gotten too comfortable, too confident. This was what happened when widows forgot their place. Clara smiled until her face hurt and went back to kneading bread with enough force to bruise the dough. That afternoon, Margaret Grayson appeared in the bakery doorway, all false concern and expensive perfume. "Clara, I heard about your troubles. How dreadful." "I'll manage." "Will you? Those repairs are quite extensive." Margaret picked up a loaf, examining it like she might find fault written in the crust. "Of course, my father might be willing to extend a loan to help you through this difficult time." There it was. The trap dressed up as charity. "At what interest rate?" Margaret's smile didn't waver. "Standard terms, 20%. 20% would bury her. Clara would spend the rest of her life paying off a loan she'd never catch up to, and Grayson would own her bakery piece by piece until there was nothing left. "I'll find another way." "There is no other way, Clara. You're out of options." Margaret set down the loaf with exaggerated care. "Unless you're counting on Mr. Hale to rescue you." "I wouldn't. Men like him lose interest quickly once the novelty wears off." The implication slithered between them like something poisonous. Clara's voice came out flat and cold. "Get out of my bakery." "I'm only trying to help." "Get out." Margaret left with a pitying smile that made Clara want to throw something. Instead, she waited until the door closed, then sank onto her stool and put her face in her hands. Lily found her like that an hour later. "Mama, why are you crying?" "I'm not crying, baby, just tired." But Lily was 6, not stupid. She climbed into Clara's lap and wrapped small arms around her neck. "Is the mean man trying to take our house again?" Clara held her daughter and lied. "No, everything's going to be fine." She had no idea how to make that true. That night, after Lily was asleep, Clara sat at the kitchen table and did math that wouldn't add up no matter how many times she reworked it. Even with Ethan's contract, even if she took every penny she earned and put nothing toward food or rent, she couldn't afford the repairs. Not in 30 days. Not in 60. She was trapped, and Grayson knew it. The knock came just after midnight, soft enough that Clara almost missed it. She grabbed the poker from beside the stove before opening the door. Bill Carver stood on her doorstep, hat in hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, I apologize for the late hour. Mr. Hale asked me to deliver this." He handed her an envelope and left before she could respond. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Ethan's careful handwriting. "I heard about the inspection. If you need help, I'm offering. No strings, no expectations, just help. E.H." Clara stared at the note until the words blurred. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation was winning. She'd already accepted his contract, already let him into her business, however peripherally. What was one more compromise? Except it wasn't just business anymore. Margaret's insinuations echoed in her head. People were already talking. If Ethan Hale started paying for bakery repairs, the gossip would turn vicious. Clara burned the note in the stove and went to bed. She made it 2 days before the reality of her situation crushed her pride into dust. Bill Carver was loading bread into the wagon when Clara approached him, the words sticking in her throat like ground glass. "Mr. Carver, is Mr. Hale's offer still available?" Bill's expression didn't change. "I expect so, ma'am. Would you like me to arrange a meeting?" "Yes, please. I'll let him know." The meeting happened the next afternoon at the bakery. Ethan arrived alone, which surprised her. No entourage, no Bill Carver, just him on horseback, tying the reins to her hitching post like this was the most natural thing in the world. Clara had sent Lily to Mrs. Henderson's. Whatever happened next, she didn't want her daughter witnessing it. Ethan removed his hat when he entered. His eyes went to the citation posted on her wall, then back to her face. "Thank you for seeing me." Clara's hands twisted in her apron. "I don't have much choice. You always have a choice. That's why I'm here instead of sending Bill with money." He pulled out a chair. "May I?" She nodded, and they sat across from each other at the small table where she'd done math that wouldn't work. "I'll be direct," Ethan said. "I can pay for the repairs. All of them. But I understand that puts you in a difficult position, so I have a different proposal." Clara waited, braced for the cost. "I buy this property, outright. Fair market value, paid in full." He held up a hand before she could protest. "You continue operating the bakery exactly as you have been. I become the landlord, you become the tenant. Rent set at whatever you're paying now. The only difference is I'm responsible for repairs and upkeep instead of you." Clara's mind raced. "Why would you do that?" "Because Grayson's trying to destroy you, and I don't like bullies." Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact. "This way, when the inspectors come back, the repairs are done and the property's in my name. Grayson can't touch it." "And what do you get out of this?" "A reliable baker, property in town. The satisfaction of watching Victor Grayson's face when he realizes his plan failed." Ethan leaned back. "Take your time thinking about it. But the offer expires when your 30 days run out. People will talk. People are already talking." His eyes were steady on hers. "Question is whether you care more about what they say or keeping a roof over your daughter's head." He was right, and Clara hated him for it. Hated that he could swoop in and solve her problems with money that meant nothing to him. Hated that she needed him. Hated that refusing would be stupid, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "If I agree, this stays business, nothing more." "Agreed. And I want it in writing, all of it. What I pay, what you're responsible for, everything. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers." Clara took a breath that felt like swallowing stones. "Then yes, I accept." Ethan didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded once and stood. "I'll start the repairs tomorrow. You won't have to close while the work's being done." After he left, Clara sat alone in her bakery and felt like she'd just sold something she couldn't get back. Not the building. That was just wood and brick. Something else. Some piece of her independence, her ability to say she'd done this alone. But Lily would have shoes. The bakery would stay open. They'd survive. That was enough. It had to be. The repairs started the next morning with a crew of workers Ethan sent from his ranch. They were efficient and quiet, treating Clara with careful respect that felt like they'd been warned to mind their manners. Within a week, she had new ovens. Within 2, the ventilation was updated and the floors reinforced. By the time the inspector returned on day 28, the bakery was transformed. The inspector walked through, making notes, his disappointment obvious. Everything was up to code. Better than code. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose that's satisfactory." Clara didn't bother hiding her smile. "Will that be all?" He left without another word. That night, Clara lay in bed and let herself feel something close to triumph. Grayson had tried to destroy her and failed. For the first time since Thomas died, she'd won a fight that mattered. The victory lasted until Sunday. Clara was in the general store, Lily dancing between the aisles, when she heard the whispers. Two women by the fabric counter, heads together, voices just loud enough to carry. Living alone in that bakery while his men work on it. Convenient, isn't it? A widow and a wealthy rancher. Wonder what she's really paying in rent. Clara's face burned. She grabbed what she needed and left without looking at them. Lily skipped alongside, oblivious, chattering about a doll in the window. Margaret Grayson was waiting outside. Clara, how lovely to see you thriving. I'm busy, Margaret. I'm sure you are. Running a business is so demanding. Margaret's smile was razor sharp. Though I suppose it's easier when you have help. Mr. Hale must be very generous. Clara's jaw tightened. He's my landlord, that's all. Of course. Though people do wonder why a man like him would take such a personal interest in a widow's bakery. There must be dozens of properties he could invest in. Why yours? Margaret tilted her head. Unless there's something you're offering that others aren't. The implication hung in the air like rot. Clara's hand tightened on Lily's shoulder. Say what you mean, Margaret, or walk away. I don't mean anything at all. I'm simply concerned about your reputation. Lily's too. You know how children suffer when their mothers are careless about appearances? Clara stepped forward, voice dropping to something dangerous. Stay away from my daughter. I'm just trying to help you see reason. If you'd taken my father's loan instead of throwing yourself at... Clara slapped her. The sound cracked across the street like a gunshot. Margaret stumbled back, hand flying to her reddening cheek, eyes wide with shock. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Margaret's expression twisted into something triumphant. You just assaulted me, in front of witnesses. Clara's heart hammered. She'd just made a terrible mistake, but looking at Margaret's satisfied smile, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. You called me a whore in front of my daughter. I call that self-defense. She turned and walked away. Lily pressed against her side before Margaret could respond. Behind her, she heard gasps, whispers, the beginning of a storm she'd just unleashed. That evening, the sheriff appeared at her door. He was an older man, tired-looking, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Grayson filed a complaint. Says you struck her. I did. He blinked. You're admitting it? She insulted me, threatened my daughter. I slapped her once, that's all. The sheriff sighed. I'm going to need you to come to the office tomorrow. There'll be a hearing. Judge Morrison will decide if charges are warranted. Fine. After he left, Clara sat Lily down and tried to explain in 6-year-old terms why Mama had hit someone, why that was wrong even when someone was being mean, why there might be consequences. Lily listened with solemn eyes and hugged her fiercely. I'm glad you hit her, Mama. She's mean. Clara laughed despite everything. Don't tell the judge that. That night, Bill Carver appeared again. Mr. Hale heard about the incident. He wants you to know he's willing to testify on your behalf if needed. He wasn't there. No, ma'am. But he can speak to your character. And his word carries weight in this town. Clara rubbed her temples. Tell him thank you, but no, I don't need him fighting my battles. Ma'am, with respect, Margaret Grayson's father owns half this town. You need someone in your corner who owns the other half. I said no. Bill studied her for a long moment. You're a stubborn woman, Mrs. Whitmore. You say that like it's a bad thing. He almost smiled. No, ma'am. Just an observation. The hearing was set for 3 days later. Clara spent those days working, baking, trying not to think about what would happen if the judge sided with Margaret. Assault charges. Possible jail time. Lily going to where? Clara had no family left, no one to take her daughter if she couldn't. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She paced her small rooms, checking on Lily every few minutes, trying to prepare herself for the worst. The knock came just after 2 in the morning. Clara opened the door with the poker in hand again, but it was just Ethan. He looked exhausted, like he'd ridden hard to get here. I'm sorry for the hour. I wanted to talk before tomorrow. I told Bill I don't need your help. I know. I'm not here to offer help. I'm here to tell you what you're up against. He gestured to the chairs. Please. They sat. Ethan's hat turned between his hands. Victor Grayson wants you gone. Not just quiet. Gone. He's been working toward this since the moment you got my contract, and Margaret's assault complaint is just the latest move. If this goes to trial, he'll make sure you lose. Judge Morrison owes him favors. Clara's stomach sank. so I'm trapped no matter what. No, you have options, just not good ones. Ethan met her eyes. You can fight this alone and probably lose. You can accept my help and definitely win, but give Grayson exactly what he wants. Proof that you're dependent on me, that the rumors are true. Those aren't options. Those are just different ways to lose. There's a third choice. Clara waited. You fight back. Not in court. Grayson owns that. You fight where it matters. You show this town that you're not some helpless widow to be pitied or destroyed. You show them strength. Ethan leaned forward. The assault hearing is going to happen regardless. But what happens after depends on how you position yourself. Right now you're isolated. One woman against the most powerful family in the territory. That's a fight you can't win. So what do you suggest? Change the narrative. Margaret said you threw yourself at me for money. Prove her wrong. Show this town that you're thriving not because of me, but because you're good at what you do. Expand. Hire help. Take on more contracts. Make yourself indispensable. Clara shook her head. I can barely keep up with what I have now. Then let me help you grow. Not as charity, as business. You expand your operation, I increase my contract. You hire other women who need work. You turn this bakery into something that matters to more than just you. And what do you get? More bread, better reputation, and the satisfaction of watching Grayson realize he can't bully everyone. Ethan's voice was quiet. I know you don't trust me. I don't blame you, but I'm not your enemy, Clara. I'm just someone who's tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones. Clara looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He'd ridden out here in the middle of the night to warn her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe he did want something from her, but right now what he was offering was a lifeline she couldn't afford to refuse. If I agree to this, I need control. This is my bakery. I make the decisions. Agreed. And no more midnight visits. People talk enough without you showing up at my door after dark. A faint smile crossed his face. Fair enough. I'll conduct all future business in broad daylight like a respectable citizen. Don't mock me. I'm not. I'm agreeing with you. He stood. The hearing's at 10 tomorrow. Bill will be there as a character witness. So will some of my ranch hands who've eaten your bread. We're not going to lie. Just tell the truth about what kind of person you are. Margaret won't like that. Margaret's going to have a lot she doesn't like before this is over. After he left, Clara sat in the dark and wondered if she'd just made a deal with the devil or found an unexpected ally. The truth was probably somewhere in between. The hearing room was packed. Clara hadn't expected that. Thought it would be her, Margaret, the judge, and maybe a clerk. Instead, half the town had shown up for the entertainment. Margaret sat with her father, both dressed in expensive clothes that screamed respectability. Clara wore her best dress, which had been mended twice and still showed wear at the hem. Judge Morrison was a thin man with the look of someone who'd spent too many years making compromises. He called the hearing to order and asked Margaret to state her case. She did, painting herself as an innocent victim of Clara's violent temper. According to Margaret, she'd merely expressed concern about Clara's situation when Clara flew into an unprovoked rage and struck her without warning. It was a masterful performance. By the time Margaret finished, complete with delicate tears, Clara looked like an unstable woman prone to violence. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood and faced the judge, hands steady. I did hit her. She's right about that. But it wasn't unprovoked. She implied I was prostituting myself to Ethan Hale in exchange for business favors. She said it in front of my 6-year-old daughter. I shouldn't have hit her, but I won't apologize for defending my honor. Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret's face went red. That's a lie, she said. You said I was offering something other women weren't, Clara cut in. In that context, what else could you have meant? Judge Morrison held up a hand. Mrs. Grayson, is this true? Margaret's mouth opened and closed. I was expressing concern about appearances. Clara's relationship with Mr. Hale has been the subject of considerable talk, and I merely suggested that I was a whore, Clara finished. Use whatever pretty words you want. That's what you meant. The judge's expression was unreadable. Are there any witnesses to this conversation? Several people shifted uncomfortably. Nobody wanted to get involved. Then Bill Carver stood. Your Honor, I'd like to speak on Mrs. Whitmore's character. The judge nodded, and Bill approached. He didn't look at Margaret or Victor Grayson, just spoke plainly. I've known Clara Whitmore for 2 months. In that time, she's been professional, hardworking, and honest. She makes the best bread in the territory, shows up early for every delivery, and raises her daughter alone without complaint. Mr. Hale's arrangement with her is purely business, a contract like any other. The suggestion otherwise is insulting not just to her, but to Mr. Hale as well. One of the ranch hands stood next, then another, then Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, who said Clara had always been a good neighbor and didn't deserve to be slandered. By the time they finished, the room's energy had shifted. Margaret looked furious. Victor Grayson's face was stone. Judge Morrison deliberated for exactly 30 seconds. Given the circumstances and the provocation described, I'm dismissing the assault complaint with a warning. Mrs. Whitmore, you're not to strike Miss Grayson again, regardless of what she says. Miss Grayson, I suggest you choose your words more carefully in the future. This hearing is concluded. Clara's legs nearly gave out. She'd won. Somehow, impossibly, she'd won. Outside, Bill Carver tipped his hat to her. Well done, ma'am. Thank you for speaking up. Just told the truth. He paused. Mr. Hale wanted me to remind you about that expansion discussion, when you're ready. Clara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. That evening, alone in the bakery after Lily was asleep, Clara let herself cry. Not from fear or sadness, but from sheer exhaustion. She'd been fighting for so long, 3 years of barely holding on, of swallowing her pride, of making do with less and less. Today, she'd fought back and won. But as she dried her tears and returned to preparing tomorrow's dough, Clara understood something crucial. This wasn't over. Grayson had lost a battle, not the war. He'd come at her again, harder next time, and she needed to be ready. Ethan was right. She couldn't survive alone anymore. She needed allies, needed to be stronger, bigger, harder to destroy. The expansion wasn't just a good idea, it was survival. Clara pulled out a clean sheet of paper and started making plans. By dawn, she had a list of women in town who needed work. By the end of the week, she'd hired 2 of them. By the end of the month, her bakery was producing triple what it had before. And for the first time since Thomas died, Clara Whitmore wasn't just surviving. She was building something. The women Clara hired were both widows like her. Sarah, whose husband had died in a mining accident 2 years back, and Ruth, who'd lost hers to pneumonia the winter before. They worked quietly at first, heads down, grateful for wages they could count on. But within weeks, the bakery had transformed from Clara's solitary workspace into something louder, messier, more alive. Sarah sang while she kneaded. Ruth told terrible jokes that made Lily giggle. The 3 women developed a rhythm that doubled their output without anyone collapsing from exhaustion. For the first time in years, Clara left the bakery some evenings before full dark. The town noticed. Some noticed with approval. Mrs. Henderson stopped by to say how wonderful it was to see Clara thriving. Others noticed with resentment. The whispers followed Clara through the general store, the post office, anywhere 2 or more people gathered. She ignored them and focused on the numbers that actually mattered. Her contracts were expanding beyond Ethan's ranch. The boarding house wanted bread daily. The saloon ordered twice a week. Even a few families who'd previously avoided her started placing orders. Money stopped being a daily crisis and became something Clara could almost plan around. She should have known it wouldn't last. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah arrived for work with a black eye and bruises on her wrists. Don't ask, Sarah said before Clara could open her mouth. I'm here. I'm working. That's all that matters. But Ruth pulled Clara aside an hour later while Sarah was in the back room. Her brother-in-law came around last night, said she's shaming the family by working here, called her a whore for taking money from Ethan Hale's kept woman. Ruth's voice was tight with anger. She told him to go to hell, and he hit her. Clara's hands curled into fists. Did she report it? To who? The sheriff? He's not going to side with a widow against a man with property. Ruth shook her head. Best thing we can do is keep her working. Give her somewhere safe to be. That same afternoon, Ruth's landlord appeared at the bakery demanding to speak with her. He was a thick-necked man with small eyes and the kind of smile that made Clara's skin crawl. Miss Porter, you're 3 days late on rent. Ruth's face went white. I told you I'd have it by Friday. I just got paid. Terms changed. Rent's due on the 1st now, and it's going up. 15%. 15, that's not legal. Take it up with the town council, or find somewhere else to live. He tipped his hat to Clara with mock courtesy. Ma'am, you might want to reconsider who you employ. Wouldn't want your business getting a reputation for harboring deadbeats. After he left, Ruth stood frozen in the middle of the bakery, hands shaking. I can't afford 15% more. I'm barely making it as it is. Clara's mind raced. How much do you need? Don't. I'm not taking charity. It's not charity. It's an advance on your wages. You'll work it off. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Why are you being kind to me? You don't even know me. Because someone was kind to me when I needed it, and because Grayson's trying to destroy us both. Clara pulled out her cash box. How much? The pattern became clear over the next 2 weeks. Every woman Clara employed faced some new hardship. Sarah's brother-in-law spread rumors that she was neglecting her children. Ruth's landlord continued raising her rent. When Clara hired a third woman, Martha, whose husband had been killed in a ranch accident, Martha's credit at the general store was suddenly revoked. It wasn't coincidence, it was strategy. Victor Grayson couldn't attack Clara directly anymore, not after the hearing. So he was attacking the women around her, making it so expensive and difficult to work at the bakery that eventually no one would. Clara called a meeting in the bakery after closing one evening. Sarah, Ruth, and Martha sat around the work table while Lily played in the corner with her doll. Clara laid out everything she'd pieced together. Grayson's trying to isolate me by making you suffer. He figures if working here costs you more than you earn, you'll quit, and once I'm alone again, I'm vulnerable. So what do we do? Sarah's voice was hard. I need this job. I can't go back to taking laundry for pennies. We don't quit. We fight back. Clara looked at each of them. But I need to know you're willing, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. Martha spoke up for the first time. Worse how? I don't know yet, but Grayson doesn't give up easy. If we stay, we're all targets. The three women exchanged glances. Some silent conversation passed between them that Clara wasn't part of. The language of women who'd survived things that left marks. Ruth spoke first. I'm staying. I've got nowhere else to go anyway. Same, Sarah said. My brother-in-law can go to hell. Martha nodded. I'm in. But what's the plan? We can't just sit around waiting for him to make the next move. Clara pulled out a ledger she'd been keeping. We document everything. Every threat, every raised rent, every supply order that gets mysteriously delayed. We build a case that shows a pattern of harassment. Then we take it to someone who can do something about it. Like who? Ruth's laugh was bitter. The sheriff's in Grayson's pocket. So's the judge. Who's left? The territorial governor and the newspapers in Denver. Clara had been thinking about this for days. Grayson's powerful in Redstone Crossing, but he's nothing in the capital. If we can prove he's systematically harassing widows and using his bank to manipulate the local economy, it becomes a story, and stories have a way of forcing people's hands. The women stared at her. Sarah whistled low. That's bold. Also possibly suicidal. You have a better idea? None of them did. They started documenting everything. Every interaction with landlords, every supply order, every threat and intimidation. Clara kept the ledger hidden under a loose floorboard in her bedroom, adding to it nightly. The evidence grew steadily, a damning portrait of systematic abuse. But Grayson was patient. He didn't make any obvious moves, just kept tightening the screws slowly, making life harder for everyone connected to Clara's bakery in ways that were difficult to prove were deliberate. 3 weeks into their documentation effort, Clara arrived at the bakery before dawn to find the door already open. Her heart stopped. She'd locked it herself the night before. She always locked it. She stepped inside carefully, looking for signs of robbery. Nothing was missing. The ovens were cold. The flour sacks stood undisturbed. Everything looked normal except the smell hit her. Kerosene. Clara's stomach lurched. She ran to the back room and found what she dreaded. Someone had poured kerosene along the base of the walls, soaking into the wood. Not enough to do damage yet, just enough to send a message. We can burn you out any time we want. Her hands shook as she lit a lamp and surveyed the damage. The kerosene hadn't been ignited, but it didn't need to be. The threat was clear. One match, and everything she'd built would disappear. She was cleaning up the kerosene when Sarah arrived. What happened? Warning shot. Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. Grayson's letting us know he's done playing. We should go to the sheriff. And say what? Someone poured kerosene in my bakery but didn't light it. He'll say it was probably kids playing a prank. Clara threw the kerosene-soaked rags into a bucket. No, we keep documenting, and we move faster. That afternoon, Clara composed a letter to the territorial governor. She wrote it 3 times before she got the tone right. Factual, but compelling, detailed, but not hysterical. She listed every incident, every intimidation, every suspicious coincidence that pointed to Grayson's interference. She enclosed copies of rent increases, supply denials, and witness statements from her employees. She mailed it herself, riding to the next town over to avoid the Redstone Crossing post office, where nothing was private. Then she waited. The response took 2 weeks. When it came, it wasn't what she'd hoped. The governor's office acknowledged her letter with bureaucratic politeness and promised to look into her concerns. No timeline, no commitment, just vague assurances that territorial authorities took such matters seriously. Clara crumpled the letter and threw it across the bakery. That's it? Ruth picked up the letter and read it. That's all we get? Politicians don't move unless they have to, Sarah said bitterly. One widow's complaint isn't enough to make them care. Clara sank onto her stool. Sarah was right. A single letter from an unknown woman in a town nobody cared about wouldn't move mountains. She needed more. Needed other voices. We need Margaret, she said suddenly. The other women stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Margaret Grayson? Ruth's voice was flat. The woman who tried to have you arrested? She hates her father. Clara was thinking fast now, pieces clicking together. I've seen it. The way she looks at him sometimes when she thinks no one's watching. He controls her completely, who she sees, what she does, who she's allowed to marry. She's as much his prisoner as any of us. That doesn't mean she'll help us, Martha pointed out. She's still a Grayson. But what if she would? What if we gave her a way out? Clara stood, pacing. Victor Grayson's power comes from fear and money. But his daughter knows things. She's been in his office, seen his ledgers, heard his private conversations. If she testified against him, she'd lose everything, Sarah finished. Her inheritance, her position, her family. Why would she do that? Because maybe she's tired of being owned. It was a long shot, possibly a stupid shot. But Clara was running out of options, and desperate people made desperate choices. That night she wrote a second letter. This one went to Margaret Grayson, hand-delivered by Bill Carver with instructions to make sure no one else saw it. The letter was simple. Margaret, I know you hate me. I don't blame you. But I think we have more in common than you'd like to admit. We're both trapped by your father in different ways. I'm trying to break free, and I think you might want the same thing. If you're interested in talking, really talking, not performing for the town, meet me at the old church tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. I will too. Clara. She had no idea if Margaret would come. Probably wouldn't. The whole thing was foolish, and Clara had no real plan beyond showing up and hoping for the best. But midnight the next night found her walking to the abandoned church on the edge of town, heart hammering, wondering if she was about to be ambushed or if Margaret might actually be desperate enough to listen. The church was dark and cold, empty except for broken pews and the smell of rot. Clara waited in the doorway, watching shadows, ready to run if this turned out to be a trap. Margaret appeared at exactly midnight. She wore a dark cloak, hood up, moving like someone who didn't want to be seen. When she pushed the hood back, her face was pale and angry. This is insane. If anyone sees us, no one will. Did you come alone? Yes. Margaret looked around the ruined church with distaste. What do you want, Clara? To offer you a choice. I don't need choices from you. Don't you? Clara stepped closer. Your father controls every aspect of your life. Who you marry, where you go, what you're allowed to say. You're 30 years old and you still need his permission to breathe. Margaret's face went tight. You don't know anything about my life. I know you're miserable. I know he uses you to do his dirty work and then treats you like property. I know you hate him almost as much as I do. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, why would I help you? You slapped me, humiliated me in front of the entire town. Because you deserved it. Clara's voice was hard. You called me a whore in front of my daughter, but I'm not here to relitigate that. I'm here because I think you're smarter than your father gives you credit for,
and I think you want out." Margaret laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Out? There's no out for women like us. You should know that better than anyone." "There is if we take it." Clara pulled out the ledger she'd been keeping. "I've been documenting everything your father's done. Every illegal eviction, every manipulated loan, every business he's destroyed. It's all here, but it's not enough. I need someone who knows the details. Someone who's seen his private records. Someone who can testify about what he's really doing." Margaret stared at the ledger like it was a snake. "You want me to betray my own father?" "I want you to tell the truth about a man who's been destroying this town for profit. There's a difference." "Not to him, there isn't.
If I do this, he'll disown me, cut me off completely. I'll have nothing. You'll have freedom and dignity and the chance to be someone other than Victor Grayson's obedient daughter." Clara met her eyes. "I'm not going to lie to you, Margaret. This won't be easy. You'll lose everything you've known, but what you have now, is it really worth keeping?" Margaret's hand shook as she reached for the ledger. She opened it, reading through Clara's careful documentation. Her expression changed as she read. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked almost like grief. "I knew he was ruthless. I didn't know he was this cruel. Now you do. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Margaret closed the ledger and handed it back. For a long moment she just stood there, and Clara could see the war happening behind her eyes. Safety versus truth. Comfort versus conscience. Finally, Margaret spoke. "I'll need time to gather records, to make copies without him noticing." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And I'll need somewhere to go after. Because once this happens, I can't go home again." Clara's heart leaped. "You'll do it?" "I must be out of my mind." Margaret's laugh was shaky. "But yes, I'll do it, on one condition." "What?" "When this is over, when he's ruined and everything falls apart, you never speak to me again. We're not friends. We never will be. This is business, nothing more." "Agreed." They shook hands in the darkness of the ruined church, two women who hated each other, finding common ground in their shared desire to destroy the man who'd hurt them both. Margaret left first, hood pulled up, disappearing into the night. Clara waited 10 minutes before following, heart racing with a mixture of terror and triumph. She'd just recruited her enemy. Now she had to hope it didn't destroy them both. Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret worked carefully. She copied documents late at night when her father was asleep. She memorized conversations. She built her own case against the man who'd controlled her entire life. And Clara prepared. She contacted the newspaper in Denver, telling them a story was coming that would expose corruption in the territorial banking system. She lined up witnesses willing to testify. She secured a room at the boarding house where Margaret could stay after everything exploded. They met 3 more times in the abandoned church, Margaret handing over documents, Clara adding them to her growing case. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary. The hatred between them was still real, still sharp, but so was their shared purpose. On a cold October morning, everything came together. Clara, Margaret, and their assembled witnesses traveled to the territorial capital. The newspaper sent a reporter. The governor's office, faced with overwhelming evidence they couldn't ignore, sent an investigator. And in a small courthouse far from Redstone Crossing, Margaret Grayson testified against her father. She was calm, precise, devastating. She described years of illegal practices, showed forged documents, detailed conversations where Victor Grayson had openly discussed destroying competitors and manipulating the local government. Clara watched from the gallery as Margaret dismantled her father's empire piece by piece with the same cold efficiency he'd taught her. Victor Grayson sat in the defendant's chair, his face turning progressively redder as his daughter spoke. When the prosecutor asked Margaret why she was testifying, she looked directly at her father. "Because I'm tired of being his accomplice, and because someone needed to stop him." The investigation that followed moved faster than Clara had dared hope. Federal authorities got involved. Bank records were seized, loans were reviewed, and one by one, Victor Grayson's crimes came to light. He'd been embezzling from his own bank, forging land deeds, bribing local officials. The corruption went deeper than even Clara had suspected, but the final blow came from an unexpected source. One of Grayson's ranch hands, a man named Tom Yates, came forward with testimony about the fire at Clara's bakery. He'd been ordered to set it, paid $20 to soak the walls with kerosene, and warned to keep his mouth shut. Clara's blood ran cold when she heard. The fire that had never happened. She'd thought it was just a threat. But Grayson had actually planned it, had hired someone to burn her bakery with her and Lily inside. The prosecutor added attempted murder to the charges. The trial took 2 weeks. Clara sat through all of it, watching as the man who'd tried to destroy her was systematically taken apart by the machinery of justice he'd thought he owned. When the verdict came down, guilty on 17 counts including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder, Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Not triumph exactly, something more complicated. Relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with the bone-deep knowledge that she'd survived something that should have killed her. Victor Grayson was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized, his bank was placed under federal oversight, and Redstone Crossing, the town he'd controlled for 2 decades, was finally free. Clara rode back to town in a daze. Sarah, Ruth, and Martha had kept the bakery running in her absence, and she returned to find Lily safe and happy, and full of stories about the bread they'd made without her. That night, Clara stood in her bakery, the space that had nearly cost her everything, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd faced down the most powerful man in the territory and won, not because she was stronger or smarter or braver than anyone else, but because she'd been desperate enough to risk everything and lucky enough to find allies when she needed them most. The door opened and Ethan walked in. He looked tired but pleased. Heard the verdict. Congratulations. Thank you for everything you did. I didn't do much. This was your fight. You helped me when I had nothing, gave me a chance when no one else would. Clara met his eyes. I won't forget that. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What happens now? Now I rebuild. Bigger this time, better. Clara smiled. Grayson's bank is being liquidated. A lot of people are going to get their debts forgiven, their properties returned. The whole town's getting a second chance. Including you? Especially me. Ethan studied her face. You've changed. Since that first morning. I got tired of being afraid. It suits you. He left before Clara could figure out how to respond to that. She stood alone in her bakery, surrounded by the smell of rising dough and the quiet sounds of a town settling into sleep, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that came from having no other choice. The real kind. The kind that believed tomorrow might actually be better than today. Clara locked the door and went upstairs to where Lily slept, curling around her daughter in the narrow bed they shared. Outside, Redstone Crossing was changing. Inside, so was she. The hardest part was over. Now came the work of building something new from the ashes of what had burned. The evidence sat in a wooden box on Clara's kitchen table like something alive and dangerous. 23 ledgers, each one meticulously documenting Victor Grayson's crimes in his own handwriting. Falsified loans, forged signatures, properties seized through deliberate manipulation of payment schedules, names and dates going back 15 years. Margaret had delivered them 3 days ago, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the box. He kept everything, she'd whispered. Every lie, every theft. He documented it all like he was proud of it. Now Clara stared at those ledgers and tried to quiet the voice in her head that said this was too dangerous, that they should burn the evidence and run while they still could. Mama, you're doing it again. Clara looked up. Lily sat across from her, coloring a picture of their new house with fierce concentration. The burns on her daughter's hands had healed to pink scars that would fade with time. The nightmares were less frequent now. But sometimes Lily would stop mid-sentence and just stare at nothing, and Clara knew she was back in that burning bakery, choking on smoke. Doing what, baby? Making your scary face. The one you make when you're thinking about the mean man. Clara forced her expression to soften. Sorry, I was just working. Is Mr. Ethan coming today? Later. He's meeting with the lawyer first. Lily went back to her coloring, humming tunelessly. She'd stopped asking when they could go home. The ranch house felt like home now, which simultaneously relieved and terrified Clara. They were becoming comfortable here, dependent on Ethan's protection. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to destroy Grayson and rebuild their independence. The plan was falling apart. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Bill Carver stood on the porch, hat already in hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, Sheriff's here to see you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Did something happen?" "He didn't say. Just asked if you'd speak with him." Sheriff Porter waited in the parlor, turning his hat between weathered hands. He looked older than Clara remembered, more tired. The fire had aged everyone. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for seeing me." "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" He glanced at Lily, who was watching from the doorway with the sharp awareness of a child who'd learned to read danger in adult expressions. "Maybe we should speak privately." Clara sent Lily upstairs with the promise of cookies later, then turned back to Porter. "What's this about?" "Victor Grayson filed a complaint. Says you've been spreading malicious rumors about his business practices. Says you've been harassing his daughter, trying to extort money from her with threats of false accusations." Porter's voice was flat, professional. "He wants you arrested for defamation and attempted blackmail." Clara's hands clenched. "That's absurd. Margaret came to me. She's the one who brought—" She stopped. The ledgers were still upstairs, hidden under her mattress. Porter didn't know about them, couldn't know until they were ready. "Brought what?" Porter asked quietly. "Nothing. Margaret came to me asking for help, that's all." "Help with what?" Clara met his eyes. "I think you know exactly what. You've been sheriff here for 20 years. You've seen what Grayson does to people who cross him. You've watched him destroy families and take their property and done nothing about it." Porter's jaw tightened. "I enforce the law, Mrs. Whitmore, nothing more." "The law he writes. The law he pays judges to uphold." Clara stepped closer. "How many complaints have you buried for him, Sheriff? How many people have come to you begging for help and you've turned them away because crossing Grayson wasn't worth the risk? That's enough." "Is it? Because it seems like everyone in this town knows what he is, but nobody wants to be the one to say it out loud. So we all just pretend. We let him keep destroying people because standing up to him is too hard, too dangerous." Clara's voice cracked. "He burned down my bakery with my daughter inside. He would have killed us both if Ethan hadn't gotten there in time. And you're here telling me he filed a complaint about rumors?" Porter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "What do you want me to say? That you're right? That I've turned a blind eye for years because keeping my job seemed more important than doing what's right? Fine. You're right. But being right doesn't change the situation. Grayson has power. He has money. He has judges and lawyers and half the territory council in his pocket. You're one woman with no proof of anything except a fire that could have been an accident. It wasn't an accident. Can you prove that? Can you prove he ordered it? Can you prove anything beyond what people will write off as a widow's paranoid accusations?" Porter shook his head. "I came here to warn you because despite what you think, I'm not completely gone. If you push this, he'll destroy you. Not with fire this time, with law. He'll tie you up in court for years. He'll take everything you have left. He'll probably take your daughter." The threat landed like a physical blow. Clara's breath caught. "So what do you suggest? I just let him win?" "I suggest you take Mr. Hale's protection and count yourself lucky you're still alive. There are worse things than losing a building." "And what about the next person he targets? What about the family who loses their farm next month? Or the shop owner who can't pay his suddenly doubled rent? Do I just walk away and let that happen?" "That's not your fight." "It became my fight when he tried to kill my daughter." Clara's voice was steel. "I'm not backing down, Sheriff. With or without your help, I'm going to prove what he is." Porter studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Resignation, maybe, or the faint ghost of the man he used to be before years of compromise wore him down. "If you've got evidence, real evidence, bring it to me first. Not the territorial marshal, not a lawyer in Denver. Me. Give me the chance to do this right before you make yourself a target he can't ignore." He settled his hat on his head. "And Mrs. Whitmore, whatever you're planning, do it fast. Grayson's not a patient man, and his daughter betraying him has made him unpredictable." After he left, Clara climbed the stairs and pulled the ledgers from their hiding place. She spread them across the bed, looking at 15 years of documented crimes. Names jumped out at her. Families she'd known, businesses that had closed mysteriously, people who'd left town with nothing. This was enough. It had to be enough. But Porter was right about one thing. They needed to move fast. Ethan arrived that evening with his lawyer,
a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wells who'd made the 2-day trip from Denver specifically for this meeting. She was younger than Clara expected, maybe 35, with steel gray eyes and the kind of contained intensity that suggested she didn't lose cases often.
They spread the ledgers across Ethan's dining table while Lily played upstairs with wooden horses Bill had carved for her. Catherine studied the documents in silence, occasionally making notes, her expression unreadable. After nearly an hour, she sat back. This is extraordinary. He documented everything, every falsified loan, every forged signature, every illegal foreclosure. It's like he never considered the possibility of being caught. She looked at Clara. Where did you get these? His daughter. She's been helping us. Is she willing to testify? Clara hesitated. Margaret had been terrified when she brought the ledgers, jumping at shadows, convinced her father knew what she'd done. The idea of her standing in a courtroom and publicly betraying him seemed impossible. I don't know, Clara admitted. We'll need her testimony to authenticate the documents. Without it, Grayson's lawyers will claim the ledgers are forgeries created by people with a vendetta against him. Catherine tapped the nearest book. These are damning, but they're not enough alone. What about the victims? Ethan asked. There are dozens of people in these ledgers who were cheated. Surely some of them would testify. They'd have to be willing to stand up publicly against the most powerful man in the territory, after years of being too afraid to even file complaints. Catherine's expression was sympathetic but realistic. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be difficult. Clara thought of Porter's warning, of the fear that had kept this town silent for 15 years. Breaking that silence would require something more than ledgers and lawyer testimony. It would require proof so undeniable that even the most compromised judge couldn't ignore it. What if we could get him to confess? The words came out before Clara fully thought them through. Both Catherine and Ethan looked at her. Confess how? Ethan asked carefully. He doesn't know we have the ledgers. He thinks Margaret's just scared and running away. What if we make him think he's won? What if we set up a situation where he feels safe enough to brag about what he's done? Catherine leaned forward. You're talking about entrapment. I'm talking about giving him enough rope to hang himself. He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. If we create the right circumstances, he'll talk. And if someone's listening, it's dangerous, Ethan said flatly. If he suspects what you're doing, he'll come at you harder than before. He's already coming at me as hard as he can. He tried to kill me, Ethan. What's he going to do next time? Try to kill me more. He could take Lily, legally through the courts. Claim you're an unfit mother who's putting your daughter in danger by antagonizing him. Ethan's voice was tight with anger that wasn't directed at her. Don't underestimate what he's capable of. Clara's hands clenched. She'd thought of that, late at night when the fears got loudest. The idea of Grayson using law and money to take her daughter was more terrifying than fire. Then we don't give him the chance. We move fast, like Porter said. We get the confession, we bring in the marshal, we arrest him before he can retaliate. Catherine was quiet, thinking. It could work, if we do it right. But we'd need witnesses, people beyond reproach, preferably law enforcement or officers of the court. And we'd need Margaret to be there, to verify her father's statements about the ledgers. She won't do it, Clara said. She's too afraid of him. Then we'll have to convince her, because without her, this plan falls apart. Finding Margaret proved easier than expected. She was staying in a small boarding house on the edge of town, paying cash and using a different name. When Clara knocked on her door 2 days later, Margaret opened it with a gun in her hand. It's me, Clara said quickly. Margaret lowered the gun, sagging against the door frame. She looked terrible, thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a tremor in her hands that suggested she hadn't slept in days. Did anyone follow you? No, I was careful. Margaret led her inside. The room was sparse and sad, nothing like the elegant house she'd grown up in. A single bag sat on the bed, still packed, like she was ready to run at any moment. You shouldn't be here, Margaret said. If my father finds out, he's filing complaints against me, trying to have me arrested for blackmail and harassment. Margaret's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I thought if I gave you the ledgers, if I helped you expose him, he'd be too busy defending himself to come after you. I didn't think he'd... She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. He knows. I don't know how, but he knows I took them. How do you know? He sent me a message, said I have one chance to return what I stole and come home. If I don't... She showed Clara a crumpled piece of paper covered in Victor Grayson's elegant handwriting. The threats were detailed and specific. What he'd do to Margaret, what he'd do to anyone who helped her, how he'd make sure she was declared mentally incompetent, locked away somewhere she'd never be found. Clara felt cold reading it. We can protect you.
No one can protect me from him. You don't understand what he's like, how far he'll go. Margaret was shaking. I made a mistake helping you. I should have just left, gone somewhere he'd never find me. And let him keep doing this to other people? Let him win? He always wins. That's what he does. Margaret's laugh was bitter. You think those ledgers will stop him? He has judges, Clara. He has lawyers.
He has enough money to make evidence disappear and witnesses recant their testimony. He's been building this empire for 30 years. You've been fighting him for 3 months. It's not even a contest. Clara sat down on the bed's edge. You're right. If we take this to court the normal way, he'll win. But what if we don't play by normal rules? What if we make him confess in front of witnesses he can't buy or threaten? She explained the plan, the setup, the confession, the witnesses. Margaret listened with growing horror. You want me to go back to him? To pretend I'm sorry and scared and willing to do whatever he wants? I want you to help us prove what he is, not just with ledgers, but with his own words. He'll kill me. If he suspects for even a second, we won't let that happen. Ethan will be there, the sheriff, witnesses who matter. We'll make it public enough that he can't do anything without exposing himself. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Why are you doing this? You could just take Ethan's protection and disappear. Build a life somewhere Grayson can't reach you. Why risk everything to fight him? Clara thought of Lily's nightmares, of the families destroyed in those ledgers, of every person who'd suffered in silence because standing up seemed impossible. Because someone has to. Because if we all just keep running and hiding, he wins forever. And because... She met Margaret's eyes. Because you helped me when you didn't have to. You risked everything to give me those ledgers. The least I can do is make sure that risk meant something. Margaret's hands twisted together. If we do this, if we actually manage to destroy him, I'll have nothing. No family, no money, no home. Everything I've ever known will be gone. You'll have your freedom. And you'll have proof that you're stronger than he ever believed you could be. That's not much. It's more than you have now. Margaret laughed, a sound halfway between despair and something that might have been hope. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the stupidest. Probably both, Clara admitted. So will you help us? The silence stretched. Outside, a dog barked. Footsteps passed in the hallway. The whole world kept turning while Margaret made the decision that would determine all their fates. Finally, she nodded. Tell me what I need to do. They spent 3 days planning. Catherine Wells laid out the legal framework, what they needed Grayson to say, what questions would trigger the most damning admissions, how to ensure the confession would hold up in court. Ethan arranged for witnesses, carefully selecting people Grayson couldn't bribe or intimidate. The territorial marshal agreed to attend, intrigued by Catherine's carefully worded summary of the evidence they'd gathered. Porter was harder to convince. You want me to stand there and watch a man confess to crimes I should have investigated years ago, he said when Clara presented the plan. You want me to be a witness to my own failure. I want you to do the right thing, finally. His jaw clenched. And if something goes wrong, if Grayson gets spooked and people get hurt, then we'll deal with it. But doing nothing guarantees more people get hurt, you know that. Porter was quiet for a long time. Where and when? The town hall. Saturday afternoon. Public enough that he can't claim we ambushed him, but controlled enough that we can manage witnesses. He won't come. Why would he walk into what's obviously a trap? Because his daughter is going to ask him to meet her there. She's going to tell him she wants to return the ledgers and apologize, and his ego won't let him resist the chance to make her grovel in front of an audience. Porter studied Clara's face. You've got this all worked out. I've had a lot of time to think while my daughter recovered from the burns your inaction allowed to happen. The barb landed. Porter flinched. Fair enough. I'll be there. Margaret sent the message to her father on Thursday. A simple note asking him to meet her at the town hall on Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. She wanted to return what she'd taken. She wanted to come home. She'd do whatever he required to make amends. The response came within hours. Grayson would be there. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Clara helped Lily into her best dress, brushed her hair until it shone, and tried to ignore the terror crawling up her spine. Bill Carver would stay at the ranch with Lily during the confrontation. Clara had argued for bringing her daughter, proof of what Grayson's fire had done, but Ethan had been adamant. Lily had been through enough. She didn't need to witness this. "Why can't I come?" Lily asked as Clara buttoned her dress. "Because Mama has some boring grown-up business to handle. You'd be bored." "I don't mind being bored." Clara knelt to her daughter's level. "I need you to stay here where it's safe. Can you do that for me?" Lily's face was solemn. "Is the mean man going to try to hurt you again?" "No, baby. I won't let him." It was a promise Clara wasn't sure she could keep. The town hall was filling up when they arrived. Word had spread, somehow despite their attempts at secrecy, that something significant was happening. People who normally avoided conflict had shown up out of curiosity or hope or the simple human desire to watch powerful men fall. Catherine Wells waited by the front door, dressed in severe black that made her look like judgment personified. "We're ready. The marshal is inside. Sheriff Porter's here. The witnesses are positioned. And if Grayson doesn't take the bait? Then we take the ledgers to the territorial court and hope we can find a judge he doesn't own." Catherine's expression was grim. "But this way is better, faster, cleaner." Margaret arrived last, looking like she might vomit. Clara caught her arm. "You can still back out. We'll find another way." "No, I need to do this." Margaret's voice shook, but her eyes were determined. "I need to see his face when he realizes I'm not coming back." Victor Grayson entered at precisely 2 o'clock. He wore his finest suit, moving through the crowd with the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything that mattered. His eyes found Margaret immediately, and something like triumph flickered across his face. "Daughter, I'm pleased you've come to your senses." Margaret's hands clenched, but her voice stayed steady. "Father, thank you for meeting me." "Where are my ledgers?" "Right here." Margaret gestured to the table where Catherine had arranged them. "All 23. I haven't damaged them." Grayson moved to the table, examining the books with careful attention. The crowd had gone silent, watching. He seemed not to notice or care about the audience. "Why did you take them?" His voice was conversational, almost gentle. It made Clara's skin crawl. "I thought I could hurt you with them. I thought if I gave them to people you'd wronged, they could use them against you." Margaret's performance was flawless. Shame, fear, defeat, all perfectly blended. "I was stupid. I see that now." "Yes, you were." Grayson looked up. "Who did you show these to?" "Clara Whitmore. Ethan Hale. No one else." "And do they have copies?" "No. These are the only records." Grayson smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Clara had ever seen. "Then you've done well, Margaret. Coming back to me was the right choice." "I want to come home." "Of course you do. Where else would you go?" He gestured at the ledgers. "Did you read them? Did you understand what they represent?" "Your business dealings, loans and properties." "No." Grayson's voice hardened. "They represent power, control, the ability to determine who succeeds and who fails in this territory. Every name in these books is someone who tried to stand against me and lost. Every property seized, every loan called early, every foreclosure, they're all lessons." Margaret's breath caught. "Lessons in what?" "In knowing your place. In understanding that some men are meant to rule and others are meant to submit. Your mother never learned that lesson. She thought she could leave me, take you, build some pathetic little life somewhere I couldn't reach." His smile turned cruel. "I made sure she understood her mistake before she died." Clara's hands clenched. This was it, the confession they needed. But Grayson was just getting started. "These ledgers prove nothing illegal," he continued. "Everything I did was technically within the law. I made sure of that. I wrote half the regulations myself, paid for the other half. The bank examiners work for me. The judges owe me favors. The sheriff—" He glanced at Porter, who stood rigid near the back wall. "Well, the sheriff knows better than to interfere." "What about Clara Whitmore?" Margaret's voice was barely audible. "What about the fire?" Grayson's expression didn't change. What fire? The one that burned her bakery, the one that nearly killed her and her daughter. Accidents happen. Old buildings, dry weather, a stray spark from the smithy next door. Tragic, certainly, but hardly my concern. You ordered it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grayson studied his daughter for a long moment. And if I did, what would you do about it? Who would you tell? Who would believe you? He stepped closer. You're my daughter, my blood. You'll always be associated with everything I've done, whether you participated or not. Turning against me doesn't make you innocent. It just makes you stupid. I have the ledgers. Ledgers prove business practices. They don't prove arson. They don't prove anything criminal enough to matter. Grayson reached out and touched her face with false tenderness. You tried to hurt me, Margaret. You failed. Now it's time to come home and accept the consequences of your betrayal. I'm not coming home. Margaret's voice was steady now. All the fear burned away. She stepped back from his touch. I'm testifying against you, all of it. The fraud, the extortion, the fire. Everything I know, I'm telling. Grayson's expression finally shifted. Surprise, then rage, then something calculating. You have no proof. I have 23 ledgers documenting 15 years of crimes. I have Clara's testimony about the threats you made. I have my own witness to conversations where you admitted ordering the fire. Margaret's chin lifted. And I have every person in this room who just heard you confess. For the first time in 30 years, Victor Grayson looked uncertain. The room erupted. People shouting, witnesses stepping forward, the marshal moving toward Grayson with handcuffs already drawn. But Clara only watched Grayson's face as understanding crashed over him like a wave. He'd been trapped by his own daughter, in front of everyone who mattered. You ungrateful little... He lunged for Margaret, but Ethan was faster. He caught Grayson's arm and yanked him back with enough force to send the older man stumbling. Touch her and I'll break your arm, Ethan said quietly. The marshal reached them before Grayson could respond. Victor Grayson, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, arson, and attempted murder. You have the right to... This is a farce, Grayson's voice cracked with fury. You can't arrest me based on some staged conversation. My lawyers will have this thrown out before nightfall. Maybe, Catherine Wells said, stepping forward with a leather folder. But they'll have a harder time with the 23 ledgers, the signed testimonies from 47 victims of your fraud, the fire inspector's revised report on the bakery fire, and the 3 witnesses who saw your men buying accelerant the day before. We've been building this case for weeks, Mr. Grayson. This meeting was just the final piece. Clara watched the color drain from Grayson's face as he realized how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. All his power, all his carefully built empire of fear and control, crumbling in a single afternoon. The marshal led him away in handcuffs. The crowd parted like he was contagious. People who'd feared him for years suddenly brave enough to meet his eyes with contempt. Margaret collapsed into a chair, shaking. Clara sat beside her and took her hand. You did it, Clara whispered. We did it. Margaret's laugh was half sob. I can't believe we actually did it. Catherine approached with documents already prepared. I'll need your formal testimony, Miss Grayson. Everything you remember about your father's business practices. It won't be pleasant. Will it be enough to convict him? Combined with the ledgers and the other evidence? Yes. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Margaret nodded, too overwhelmed for words. Outside, the sun was setting over Redstone Crossing, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Clara uncomfortably of fire. But this time, the burning had served a purpose. This time, something good had risen from the flames. Ethan found her on the town hall steps an hour later. Most of the crowd had dispersed, carrying news of Grayson's arrest through the town like wildfire. Bill sent word Lily's fine, asking for you. I should get back to her. Clara. Ethan's voice stopped her. You know everything changes now. I know. Grayson's properties will be seized. His loans will be reviewed. Every business arrangement he made will be investigated. This town is going to turn inside out. Good. It needs to. Ethan smiled faintly. You're not worried about the chaos? I've been living in chaos for 3 years. A little more won't kill me. Clara turned to face him fully. Thank you for everything, for believing this could work. I didn't believe it could work.
I believed you couldn't be stopped from trying. His expression sobered. What happens now? With you and Lily? Clara had been avoiding that question. With Grayson arrested, she could rebuild her bakery, could return to her old life or some version of it. She didn't need Ethan's protection anymore, but she realized, standing there watching him watch her, that she didn't want to go back, not to being alone, not to barely surviving, not to keeping everyone at arm's length because letting people close felt too dangerous. I don't know, she admitted. I guess we figure it out. Together? The word hung between them, tentative and hopeful. Clara thought of all the rules she'd made for herself, all the walls she'd built, the determination to never depend on anyone, never trust anyone, never let herself be vulnerable enough to be hurt again. Grayson had tried to burn those walls down. Instead, he'd burned away her fear. Together, she agreed. Ethan's smile was worth every risk she'd taken. They walked back to the ranch together as stars began appearing overhead. Tomorrow would bring complications, legal proceedings, property disputes, the massive task of rebuilding a town's economy after its central banker was exposed as a criminal. But tonight, Clara let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope that the future might actually be better than the past. Lily met them at the door, launching herself at Clara with enough force to nearly knock her over. "Mama, did you beat the mean man?" Clara held her daughter close, breathing in the little girl's smell of her. "Yes, baby, we beat him." "Good. Can we have cookies now?" Clara laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "Yes, we can have cookies." Inside, Bill had lit the lamps and started a fire in the hearth. The warmth wrapped around them like a promise. Clara settled Lily at the table with cookies and milk, while Ethan poured coffee for the adults. "What happens to Margaret?" Clara asked. "Catherine's arranging for her to testify in exchange for immunity. She'll be protected during the trial." Ethan sat across from her. "After that, I don't know. She'll inherit nothing from Grayson. His assets will be liquidated to repay his victims. She'll need somewhere to go, someone to help her rebuild." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering?" "Maybe. She helped us when she didn't have to. Seems right to return the favor." They sat in comfortable silence while Lily chattered about the wooden horses and the stories Bill had told her. Normal, domestic, peaceful. The kind of evening Clara had stopped believing was possible. Later, after Lily was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Clara stood on the porch looking at the stars. Ethan joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Porter came by while you were putting Lily down. Wanted me to tell you the territorial marshal is bringing in outside investigators. They're going to review every case Grayson touched for the last 20 years. That'll take months. Years, probably, but it's necessary." Ethan handed her a cup. "He also said to tell you that you were right about all of it and that he's sorry it took this long." Clara sipped the coffee, letting the apology settle. "I don't forgive him, not yet. Maybe not ever. I don't think he expects you to." They stood in silence, watching the night. Somewhere in town, families who'd been crushed by Grayson's schemes were hearing the news and daring to hope. Tomorrow, Catherine would begin the process of untangling 15 years of fraud and returning property to its rightful owners. The work would be massive, complicated, probably frustrating. But it would happen, because Clara had refused to accept that powerful men always won. "What will you do?" Ethan asked. "When the bakery's rebuilt? Run it, expand it, keep hiring women who need work. Maybe open a second location." Clara turned to him. "But not alone. I'm done trying to do everything by myself." "Partnership, then?" "Partnership," Clara agreed. "In business and whatever else this is." Ethan's smile was slow and genuine. "I can work with that." Clara let herself lean against him, solid and warm in the cold night. She'd spent 3 years believing that needing anyone was weakness, that independence meant isolation. But standing here, watching stars wheel overhead while her daughter slept safe inside, Clara understood something crucial. Strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about knowing when to accept help, when to trust, when to let the walls come down and build something new with someone else. She'd survived the fire, survived Grayson's attempts to destroy her, survived 3 years of grief and desperation and barely hanging on. Now she was ready to do more than survive. She was ready to live. The trial lasted 6 weeks, and for 6 weeks Redstone Crossing held its breath.
Clara watched from the gallery as Catherine Wells systematically dismantled Victor Grayson's empire, piece by documented piece. The ledgers sat on the prosecutor's table like silent witnesses, their pages marked with colored tabs that corresponded to specific crimes. Fraud, extortion, forgery, arson, attempted murder. Margaret testified for 3 days straight, her voice never wavering even when Grayson's lawyers tried to paint her as a vindictive daughter seeking revenge. She recounted conversations, produced letters, described the methodical way her father had built his empire on the backs of broken families. By the time she finished, half the courtroom was in tears, and the other half looked ready to drag Grayson out and hang him themselves. The victims testified next. 47 people who'd lost homes, businesses, farms, futures. They came one after another, telling stories that sounded so similar they could have been reading from the same script. A late payment notice. Suddenly accelerated loan terms, property seized before they could respond. Grayson sitting in his office explaining with false sympathy that business was business. Clara testified on day 12. She described the fire in detail, the smoke, the heat, Lily's screams, the moment she'd been certain they were both going to die. She showed the jury her daughter's scarred hands, showed them photographs of the bakery's charred remains, met Grayson's eyes across the courtroom and refused to look away. His lawyers tried to discredit her, called her an opportunist who'd manufactured evidence to punish a man she blamed for her own business failures, suggested her relationship with Ethan Hale had clouded her judgment, that she was seeking revenge for imagined slights. Catherine destroyed them on cross-examination, producing the fire inspector's revised report that documented accelerant use, witness statements placing Grayson's men at the scene, and the threatening letters Grayson had sent to Clara in the weeks before the fire. By week 4, even Grayson's expensive lawyers looked defeated. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Clara sat between Ethan and Margaret, Lily on her lap because her daughter had insisted on being there for this. The jury filed in with faces that gave nothing away, and for one horrible moment Clara thought they'd failed, that somehow Grayson's money and power had reached even here. Then the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The courtroom erupted, people cheering, crying, embracing strangers. The judge had to bang his gavel for 5 minutes before order was restored. Clara just sat there, holding Lily, letting the relief wash over her in waves that made her dizzy. It was over. Actually, finally over. Grayson stood rigid as the judge sentenced him. 25 years for fraud, 15 for extortion, 20 for arson, 25 for attempted murder, all to run consecutively. He'd die in prison. There was no question about that. The man was 63, and even if he served only half his sentence, he'd be 90 before seeing freedom again. He looked at Margaret as they led him away in chains, and Clara saw something in his expression that might have been disbelief, like he genuinely couldn't understand how his own daughter had destroyed him. Margaret looked back without flinching. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled to over 100 people. News had spread through town fast, and it seemed like half of Redstone Crossing had shown up to watch Victor Grayson's fall become official. Sheriff Porter approached Clara as she navigated through well-wishers. He looked older than he had 6 weeks ago, more worn. Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted to apologize. Properly this time. Clara shifted Lily to her other hip. For what specifically? There's a lot to choose from. He flinched but didn't look away. For not doing my job. For letting fear and convenience make me complicit in what Grayson did. For failing every person who came to me for help and got nothing. That's quite a list. I know, and I know an apology doesn't fix it, doesn't undo the damage, but I wanted you to hear it anyway. Porter's hands twisted his hat. I'm resigning. Figured the town deserves a sheriff who will actually protect them. Clara studied him for a long moment. Or you could stay and be the sheriff you should have been all along. The one who learned from his mistakes and does better. You think the town would accept that? I think the town needs someone who knows what Grayson was capable of and will make sure it never happens again. Someone who understands the cost of staying silent. Clara met his eyes. Do better, Porter. That's all anyone can ask. He nodded slowly. I'll try. As he walked away, Ethan appeared at Clara's elbow. That was generous. That was practical. We need law enforcement that works. Porter's not a bad man. He was just a weak one. Maybe now he'll be stronger. You're giving him more credit than he deserves. Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of holding grudges. Clara watched the crowd celebrating around them. Grayson spent his whole life consumed by power and control. I'm not going to spend mine consumed by anger. Ethan's hand found hers. Ready to go home? Home. The words still felt strange but increasingly right. The ranch house had become more than temporary shelter. It had become the place where Lily laughed, where Clara baked experimental recipes that Bill and the ranch hands gamely tested, where she and Ethan sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. Yes, let's go home. The reconstruction of Redstone Crossing's economy took longer than the trial. Catherine Wells worked with territorial investigators to untangle 15 years of Grayson's financial manipulations, returning properties to their rightful owners where possible and compensating victims where return was impossible. Some families got their farms back. Others received financial settlements that let them start over. Clara's bakery lot was returned to her in November, along with a formal apology from the town council and an offer to waive business fees for 5 years. She accepted the property and ignored the fee waiver. She didn't need charity. Not anymore. Building the new bakery took 3 months. This time, Clara designed it herself, larger than before, with space for multiple ovens, a storefront with actual windows, and living quarters above that didn't leak when it rained. Ethan tried to pay for the construction, and they had their first real fight about it. I have the money, he argued. Why make this harder than it needs to be? Because this is mine, Clara shot back. I'm not rebuilding my independence by depending on you to pay for everything. It's not dependence, it's partnership. Partnership means contributing equally. You've already given me more than I can repay. Let me do this part myself. They compromised. Ethan provided the lumber from his land at cost, and Clara paid for everything else from her savings, which had grown substantially since she'd started supplying not just Ethan's ranch but 2 others and the territorial office in Denver. The business had expanded faster than she'd imagined possible, and the money proved she'd been right to invest in hiring help instead of trying to do everything alone. Sarah and Emma, the 2 women she'd hired after the assault hearing, had become more than employees. Sarah was 43 with 3 children and a husband who'd died in a mining accident. Emma was 19 and pregnant, abandoned by a man who'd promised marriage and delivered nothing. Clara gave them both jobs, fair wages, and the dignity of honest work. In return, they gave her loyalty and friendship that money couldn't buy. Margaret surprised everyone by asking for a job. I don't know anything about baking, she admitted when she approached Clara in January, but I can keep books. I can manage inventory. I can handle customer orders and supply contracts, and I need something to do besides sit in that boarding house and think about everything I've lost. Clara hired her on the spot. Working together was strange at first. They'd been enemies for so long that cooperation felt unnatural. But Margaret was methodical and organized, and within 2 weeks she'd streamlined their ordering system and negotiated better terms with their flour supplier. Within a month, she'd expanded their contracts to include 4 more ranches and 2 hotels. You're good at this, Clara said, watching Margaret calculate profit margins with the same precision her father had used to calculate how to destroy people. I learned from him. All those years watching him manipulate numbers and control markets. Turns out those skills work just as well for building something as they do for destroying it. Margaret looked up from her ledger. Does it bother you that I'm using what he taught me? No, it would bother me if you'd learned nothing and made the same mistakes he did. But you're not him, Margaret. You proved that. Margaret's eyes got suspiciously bright. She looked away quickly, but not before Clara saw the emotion there. 3 months after testifying against her father, Margaret was still raw, still processing the magnitude of what she'd done and lost. Thank you, she said quietly, for giving me this chance. Thank you for taking it, and for helping destroy your father. I know that wasn't easy. No, but it was necessary. Margaret closed the ledger. Do you ever regret it, going after him? You could have just taken Ethan's protection and left town, started over somewhere Grayson couldn't reach you. Clara thought about that. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I'd run. But then I think about all the people who got their property back, all the families who got justice, and I know we made the right choice, even when it was hard. It was more than hard. It was terrifying. Yes, but we did it anyway. That's what matters. The new bakery opened on a cold morning in early March, exactly 1 year after the day Clara had screamed at a reckless rider in the town square and unknowingly changed the course of her entire life. The building stood where the old one had burned, but it bore no resemblance to that cramped, leaking space. This bakery was solid and bright, with a sign carved by Bill Carver that read, "Whitmore and Company," in elegant letters. The company had been Clara's idea, acknowledgement that she wasn't building this alone anymore. Half of Redstone Crossing showed up for the opening. People who'd ignored her for 3 years suddenly wanted to shake her hand, buy her bread, tell her how brave she was. Clara accepted the praise with grace she didn't entirely feel and sold out of inventory by noon. Lily spent the day playing hostess, showing people around, explaining the new ovens with the enthusiasm of a 6-year-old who'd watched every step of construction. She wore a new dress that actually fit. Her burns faded to pale scars that she no longer tried to hide. "Mama, Mrs. Henderson wants to order 12 loaves for next Sunday," she announced, appearing at Clara's elbow with the gravity of someone conducting serious business. "Tell her we can do that, and ask if she wants anything special." Lily scampered off, importantly relaying the message. Clara watched her daughter navigate the crowd with confidence and felt something loosen in her chest. This was what she'd fought for. Not just the bakery, not just justice. This, Lily growing up without fear, without the constant weight of survival crushing every moment of joy. Ethan found her in a rare quiet moment, 2 cups of coffee in hand. They'd fallen into the habit of coffee together, morning conversations on the ranch porch that had become as essential as breathing. "Congratulations," he said, handing her a cup. "You did it." "We did it," Clara gestured at the crowded bakery. "I couldn't have managed this alone." "You could have. You're too stubborn to fail, but I'm glad you didn't have to." They stood in comfortable silence, watching customers browse and chat and celebrate. This was more than a bakery opening. It was proof that Grayson's empire could be dismantled, that ordinary people could fight back and win, that the future could be better than the past. "I have something for you," Ethan said. He pulled a folded document from his pocket. "Before you get angry, just listen." Clara unfolded it warily. It was a deed to the bakery property, signed over from Ethan's name to hers. Complete ownership, no strings attached. "Ethan, you were right about wanting to own this yourself, about not wanting to depend on me for your business. So I'm giving it back. All of it. You'll owe me nothing but the rent we agreed on originally, which you can pay or not pay as you see fit." Clara's throat closed. "This is worth... I know what it's worth, and I know what you're worth, which is considerably more. Take it, Clara. Build your empire without anyone else's name on the deed." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist this was too much, that she couldn't accept something so valuable. But looking at the deed, at Ethan's steady expression, she understood this wasn't charity. It was respect, recognition that she'd earned this through blood and fire, and refusing to break when breaking would have been easier. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in her life. "You're welcome. Now stop getting emotional and go sell some bread. You've got customers waiting." Clara laughed, wiping her eyes, and returned to work. Spring rolled into summer and summer into fall. The bakery thrived. Clara's contracts expanded to include territorial government offices, mining operations, and ranch consortiums across 3 territories. She hired 4 more women, all of them carrying stories of hardship and survival. She gave them work, wages, and the radical idea that they deserved better than what life had handed them. Margaret proved invaluable, managing the business side with ruthless efficiency, while Clara focused on production and quality. They still weren't quite friends, too much history for that, but they'd achieved something better. Mutual respect born from shared survival. Sarah became Clara's right hand in the kitchen, her steady presence and dark humor making long baking days bearable. Emma had her baby in June, a girl she named Hope because that's what Mrs. Whitmore gave me when I had nothing left. Clara was godmother, a responsibility that terrified and honored her in equal measure. Lily started school that fall, walking to the newly built schoolhouse with Bill Carver's daughter, and returning each afternoon with stories about letters and numbers and the boy who'd pulled her hair. She'd stopped having nightmares about the fire, stopped flinching at the smell of smoke. She was just a regular 7-year-old now with regular problems and regular joys. Watching her daughter bloom, Clara finally let herself believe they'd actually made it. The survival phase was over. The rebuilding phase was succeeding. Now they were in something new, the living phase, where tomorrow wasn't just another crisis to navigate, but possibility waiting to unfold. Ethan proposed on a Sunday in October, exactly 18 months after the morning he'd destroyed her bread, and she'd screamed at him like he was the devil himself. They were on the ranch porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over land that seemed to stretch forever. Lily was still asleep. The world was quiet except for birdsong and the distant sounds of ranch hands starting their day. "I've been thinking," Ethan said in the careful tone that meant he'd practiced this conversation. "That's dangerous," he smiled. "About us, about what we are and what we could be." Clara's heart picked up pace. And what are we? Partners, friends, people who make each other better, people who survived hell together and came out stronger. He set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "I love you, Clara Whitmore. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you refuse to break even when breaking would have been easier. I love watching you build something extraordinary from ashes. I love your daughter and the life we've created here." Clara's breath caught. "I'm not asking you to give up anything you've built. I'm not asking you to change or compromise or be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm just asking if you'd consider making this permanent, making us official." Ethan pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Clara looked at the ring, then at his face, then at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A year and a half ago, she would have said no automatically, would have cited independence, self-sufficiency, the necessity of standing alone. But she'd learned something crucial in the months since Grayson's arrest. Strength wasn't isolation. Partnership wasn't weakness. And loving someone didn't mean losing yourself. It meant choosing to build something together that neither person could create alone. "Yes," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. "But I'm keeping my bakery separate, and Lily and I are keeping our name. I wouldn't have it any other way." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Like maybe this had always been where they were heading from the moment she'd grabbed his collar in the street and refused to let fear make her small. They told Lily that afternoon. She threw her arms around both of them and announced that she'd been hoping for this forever and ever, which was approximately 4 months in 7-year-old time. Then she immediately started planning what she'd wear to the wedding and whether there would be cake. "Of course there'll be cake," Clara said, laughing. "I own a bakery. Can I help make it?" "You can be in charge of taste testing." Lily deemed this acceptable and ran off to tell Mrs. Henderson, who would undoubtedly spread the news through town by sunset. The wedding happened in December, small and simple, because neither Clara nor Ethan wanted spectacle. Just close friends, ranch hands, bakery employees, and the people who'd stood with them when standing alone would have meant destruction. No fancy dress, no elaborate ceremony, just promises made in front of witnesses who knew the cost of keeping them. Margaret cried through the entire service. Sarah and Emma stood up with Clara, and Bill Carver stood with Ethan, and Lily was flower girl with such seriousness that several people had to stifle laughter. Judge Morrison, who'd proven surprisingly fair once Grayson's influence was removed, officiated. They held the reception at the ranch because it was the only place big enough for the crowd that showed up. People brought food and music and stories. Sheriff Porter gave an awkward toast about second chances and doing better. Catherine Wells came all the way from Denver with legal documents formalizing the property transfers and settlements from Grayson's seized assets. Clara danced with her new husband under stars that seemed impossibly bright, Lily spinning between them, and felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Real, deep, unshakable peace. Months rolled into years, and the years shaped themselves into a life Clara had stopped believing was possible. The bakery grew. Clara opened a second location in the next town over, then a third in a mining settlement that was growing into a city. She hired more women, paid fair wages, created opportunities for people who'd been told they were worthless. Former victims of Grayson's schemes found work there, rebuilding their lives one loaf at a time. Margaret became a full partner in the business, her organizational genius and head for numbers perfectly complementing Clara's creative vision. They never became close friends, too much history for that, but they built something better. A working relationship based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Sarah eventually married one of Ethan's ranch hands and brought her children to live on the ranch, where they grew up alongside Lily. Emma's daughter, Hope, became Lily's best friend, the two of them inseparable. Bill Carver taught them both to ride and carve wood and shoot straight, skills Clara once thought were wasted on girls, but now understood were essential for women who'd grown up watching their mothers fight for survival. Ethan expanded his ranching operation, buying up properties that came available as Grayson's empire was liquidated. But he ran his business differently. Fair wages, safe conditions, contracts that protected workers instead of exploiting them. Other ranchers grumbled about it, said he was spoiling the labor force with unrealistic expectations. Ethan ignored them and kept doing what he knew was right. Clara and Ethan had a son in their second year of marriage, a squalling, red-faced boy they named Thomas after Clara's first husband. Because some loves didn't compete with new ones, they just expanded the heart to hold both. Lily was fiercely protective of her baby brother, appointing herself his guardian and advisor on all matters of importance. Redstone Crossing changed too. With Grayson gone and his stranglehold broken, new businesses opened. The bank was restructured under territorial oversight, its practices audited regularly. Sheriff Porter kept his job and proved Clara right by becoming the lawman he should have been all along, fair, honest, unwilling to look away when powerful people broke rules. The town would never be perfect. There were still struggles, still injustices, still people who preferred the old ways where might made right. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. 5 years after Grayson's conviction, Clara stood in the garden she'd planted where her old bakery had burned. What had been ash and ruin was now a riot of growth. Vegetables and flowers intermingled in organized chaos, produce that fed her family and employees, beauty that reminded everyone who saw it what could rise from destruction. Lily was 12 now, tall and confident, helping in the bakery after school and already showing talent for business that rivaled Margaret's. Thomas was 3, digging in the dirt with the fierce concentration of a child determined to find worms. Ethan worked nearby, mending a fence that didn't really need mending but gave him an excuse to be outside on a beautiful afternoon. Clara knelt in the garden, hands in the earth, and thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, desperate, angry, alone. Convinced that survival was the best she could hope for and that letting anyone close would only lead to more loss. That woman had been wrong about so many things. Survival wasn't the ceiling, it was the foundation. Everything worth building came after. "Mama, look," Lily called. "I found the first strawberries." Clara joined her daughter, admiring the small red fruits that had survived the late frost. "Those are perfect. We'll use them for a special batch tomorrow." "Can I help?" "Always." As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Clara's employees began arriving for the weekly gathering they'd started, a tradition where everyone who worked at the bakery came together for a meal, bringing their families, sharing their weeks, building community from what had started as simple employment. Sarah brought her husband and children. Emma arrived with hope and a new man she was cautiously dating. Margaret came alone but smiling, carrying a cake she'd attempted to bake with Emma's help. Bill Carver and his family wandered over from the ranch proper. More people followed, employees, friends, neighbors, former victims of Grayson who'd found new lives in the aftermath of his fall. They spread blankets in the garden and shared food and stories as the sun painted the sky in colors that once would have reminded Clara of fire, but now just looked like beauty. Lily and Hope and the other children played while adults talked and laughed and planned. This was what Clara had built, not just a business or a building, but a community. A network of people who'd learned that surviving meant helping each other, that strength came from standing together, that the future could be shaped by choice instead of accepting whatever powerful people decided to allow. Later, after the gathering had wound down and most people had gone home, Clara walked through her garden with Ethan. Thomas had fallen asleep on his father's shoulder, his small body heavy and trusting. Lily trailed behind, picking flowers for tomorrow's table arrangements. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked. "The old life, before everything changed." Clara thought about the cramped bakery with its leaking roof, about the constant fear of not making payments, about the loneliness that had become so familiar she'd stopped noticing it, about the woman who'd screamed at a stranger in the street because she'd had nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. "No," she said honestly, "that life was just surviving,
This is living. You have regrets, though, about how hard it was, about what you had to go through. Of course I have regrets. I regret that it took a fire to make me realize I couldn't do everything alone. I regret the time Lily spent being afraid. I regret not standing up to Grayson sooner before he hurt so many people. Clara looked at the garden growing where her old bakery had burned, but I don't regret the outcome. I don't regret what we built from the ashes. Ethan shifted Thomas to his other shoulder. You built it. I just helped. We built it together. That's the whole point. Clara took his free hand. I spent 3 years thinking that needing anyone made me weak, that accepting help meant giving up control. But partnership isn't about losing yourself. It's about choosing to create something better than what either person could make alone. That sounds like something you should tell the new women you're hiring. Clara smiled. Maybe I will. They walked back toward the house as stars began appearing overhead. Behind them, the garden rustled in the evening breeze, new growth rising where destruction had tried to win. It was the perfect metaphor for everything Clara had learned, that the harshest fires couldn't stop things from growing back. They just changed what form that growth would take. Inside, Clara tucked Thomas into bed and kissed his forehead, checked on Lily, who was already half asleep with a book open on her chest, stood in the doorway watching her children breathe and felt the overwhelming gratitude of someone who'd come terrifyingly close to losing everything. Downstairs, Ethan was making tea the way he did every night, a ritual that had become as essential as breathing. Clara joined him, accepting the cup, settling into the comfortable silence they'd perfected over 5 years of building a life together. I love you, she said, because some things needed saying even when they were obvious. I love you too. Ethan pulled her close. Thank you for screaming at me that morning, for refusing to back down, for being exactly who you are. Clara laughed against his chest. Thank you for not destroying my bread more often. I'll try to restrain myself. They stood in their kitchen, in the house they'd made a home, and let the peace of the moment settle around them like a blanket. Outside, the garden grew. In town, the bakery sat ready for tomorrow's work. Across the territory, women Clara had hired were building their own futures, creating their own versions of rising from ashes. This was legacy. Not the buildings or the business, but the idea that ordinary people could fight back against those who tried to crush them. That survival could transform into thriving, that the harshest fires couldn't destroy everything. Sometimes they just cleared the ground for something better to grow. Clara Whitmore had started as a desperate widow with nothing left to lose. She'd fought her way through fear and fire and the kind of adversity that broke most people. She'd learned to accept help, to build partnerships, to turn anger into action and action into change. Now she was something different, not perfect. She still had moments of doubt, still made mistakes, still struggled with letting people close. But she was stronger, wiser, surrounded by people she loved and who loved her back. The woman who once had nothing had built an empire, not of power or control like Grayson's, but of community and purpose, and the radical notion that everyone deserved dignity and fair treatment. And in the place where her old life had burned to ash, she'd planted a garden that would feed her family and community for generations to come. That felt like victory. Real, lasting, meaningful victory. The kind that no fire could ever take away.